And we're live. We're here for the Toehold MMA podcast. We're here with Ryan, my co-host, and I'm Dave, and we're here to break down UFC 252. We're going to start off with the first fight of the night. We got Kamaka versus Tony Kelly. I'm going to throw it to you first, Ryan. What do you think of this fight for DraftKings perspective?
I'm a little bit torn about this one. Right now, I do have Kai in my cash lineup, and it is a cash lineup that I do like a lot. Outside of that, I do think that Kai will win from the tape that I saw. I do think that he should be able to throw enough strikes to get a decision-based victory. But I question if he's worth his price of 8,900. Um, GPP, I think that I'll find myself going to some of the other people around his price point, maybe a little bit more. But honestly, we'll get to this later. Some of the other people a little bit under him, I really don't like much either. So I do think for cash, he's not a horrible play. I think he's safe for 60 to 70. Granted, that's not really necessarily what you want for his price point of 8,900, I believe he is. But I don't hate him. But yeah, I'm kind of indifferent on this one.
I mean, like you said, Kamaka is more of a cash play for me. But even that, he doesn't throw it. He doesn't throw a high volume at all. If he's gonna score well, it's gonna have to do from the wrestling he does have to land some takedowns and maybe some advances. But if it stays on the feet for all 3 rounds, he doesn't throw at a high pace, and I just don't see him scoring very well. Like you said, I think honestly he would probably score more in like 60, maybe 70 range. He's definitely not going to top. He's not going to touch 80s. He's just not that high volume. Where Tony Kelly, on the other hand, when he wins, he typically finishes fighters. I think all of his fights have pretty much have gone to finish when he's won. So I don't know because Kamaka's never been finished. I don't know if Kelly's going to be the person to finish him. But for GPP, if you're playing, 20 lineups, you might as well sprinkle him in a little bit. He's not a bad flyer, especially for $7,300 for GPP. He's probably going to be fairly low owned. But but at the same time, I think Kamaka's probably going to squeak out maybe not squeak out, but grind out a decision victory. But it's not going to be scoring well enough from a DraftKings perspective.
Yeah.
All right, next fight we got Porter versus Daukaus. Porter is at 8,500 on DraftKings, and Daukaus is at 7,700. This is a fight you're going to probably want to target for DraftKings. I believe the odds are like minus 450, or what was it? Fight doesn't go to decision. It must have went down a little bit. Minus 285. So this fight is more than likely going to end inside the distance. You're going to, both these guys are big heavyweights. Porter weighs right at the heavyweight limit, and Daukaus just lays a little bit under. Porter's 35 years old. He's, very slow, not very agile. Daukaus swings hard, heavy strikes. He's very wild. I think for 7,700, I think Daukaus is probably going to be a little bit more popular this week because he's cheaper. He's easier to fit in, and I think personally thinks he's probably going to get the knockout in the first round, but I'm not overly confident in it. It's very, very low level heavyweight MMA, but I think Porter might be a little bit lower owned out of the two and is not a bad. Obviously another fighter you want to target for GPPs, but either way, I'm not super confident on one way or another who's going to win, but it's more than likely going to end in the first round, or it's going to be one of those ugly heavyweight fights that's very sloppy in rounds 2 and 3 where they just bear hug each other and wait for the bell to ring at the end of round 3 and get a decision win. So what do you think, Ryan?
I do lean Porter. If you look at his fighting history, you will recognize a lot of names. John Jones, Gabriel Gonzaga, Josh Diekman. He has fought some very well known fighters in the MMA world. Granted, a very long time ago, uh, but he was at least well thought of enough at one point to have been able to fight those fighters and fighters of those caliber. Um, I think that if Dukakis does not finish him in the first round, that his cardio is just not going to be there. Um, so I do lean a little bit Porter here uh, to be able to finish Dukakis. Dukakis, from the video that I saw, just his striking defense was not very good at all. And that is very troublesome for a fighter of his size. His brother is a very well known MMA prospect, up and coming prospect. Uh, I do not think he has near the talent of his brother. So yeah, I do like Porter more so in this fight. It's more so a GPP fight. I don't necessarily feel confident in picking either of these fighters for cash. Well, I do think that it will finish. It is a little bit of a toss up of who is going to finish who. So I wouldn't target it in cash, just due to the fact where you could get 100 points, you could get 5 points. And that's not something you want to play around with in a cash game. But GPP, I do like, but I like Dukakis a little bit as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at these guys' fight logs, I think they've only combined from, Dukakis is 8-3, Porter's 10-5, but they've only gone to decision, I think, 2 or 3 times in their entire career. So this fight is going to end in a finish more than likely. So for GPPs, target this fight. Obviously, if you need the salary savings, go Dukakis. If you have, if you feel more confident in Porter, go with Porter. But you don't want one of these two in your lineup.
Yeah, I do agree with you that I think Porter will probably be the lesser owned fighter, if not for his salary, for the fact of the Dukakis name.
Yeah.
In, like I said, MMA, his brother is a very highly talked about prospect. So people are going to hear that name and think that this guy is just as good as him. Honestly, I think so. I think Dukakis will be pretty high.
All right. Next fight, we got Ashley Yoder at 7,600 and Livian Souza at 8,600. Ryan, I'm going to throw this to you. What do you think for DraftKings?
I think you want to stay far, far away from this fight. This is probably going to be the most boring fight of the night. If you have to get a drink, if you have to take a piss break, do it during this fight. Because it's not going to be an entertaining fight at all. Souza, she averages less than 2 strikes per minute. I believe it's 1.73 or something like that.
Yeah.
So she just does not strike near enough in order to be able to score well on DraftKings. I think for her price point at 8,600, she is a complete fade on DraftKings. I do not think there is any way, shape, or form that she pays for her price. I would 100 times over take Porter over her at basically the same exact price. So yeah, I don't like Yoder cash. I don't think she's horrible because I think that she will be able to land enough strikes to be able to pay off her price point and win, in probably a decision-based victory. I do lean her a little bit to get the win, but it's a slight lean. So I mean, at her price point, 7,600, she's not the worst cash play in the world, but I would not touch either of these fighters in GPP.
There's like the more we've been talking about this, because obviously we were on the fight forecast earlier breaking down these fights. as you said, for as a whole, you don't want to target this fight at all for GPP. I don't think either fighter is probably going to score very well. But the more we've been talking, the more I'm leaning towards Yoder, and I'm becoming a little more confident, I think, in Yoder. I mean, if you look at who Yoder has fought, she's fought Ronda Marcos, she's fought Mackenzie Dern, she's fought Angela Hill, she's fought some tough competition, and those people, a lot of those fighters are tough to take down. Like, you don't want to take down Dern. If you take down Dern, she's going to sub you.
Yeah.
Angela Hill's got some pretty good takedown, or not very good. She's got okay takedown defense. It's getting better, and then Ronda Marcos has got pretty decent takedown defense. And you don't want to mess with, Ronda Marcos on the ground either. She's got a black belt, from what I believe to know, and Ashley, gets a little over one takedown per round. So I think she has potential to score some takedowns in this fight and use her height and reach. That's why they call her the spider monkey. She's got some crazy long limbs. She'll probably be able to hold, Souza down and, try to go for submissions. I don't think she's going to be able to do much. I don't think ground and pound or anything like that. She'll probably just ride her on her back. But like you said, Yoder's more of a cash play, if anything, just because of the 7,600. But for the most part, I would just kind of stay away from this fight.
Yeah.
Next up, we got Brown versus Chavez. Very, very good fight to target for DraftKings. You got Brown, who's a high-volume wrestler. In his last fight, he got 8 takedowns in a loss in 2 rounds and scored over 70 points for DraftKings. Where you got Danny Chavez, who's a very good hard puncher with good striking. And Brown is one of those fighters who's hard to trust. He's been knocked out multiple times. He's been sub multiple times. And a lot of these fights he was winning until till that moment happens. He just always seems to get caught or puts himself in a bad situation to get finished. And it's very interesting. I mean, for 8,800 for Brown, he's probably going to be semi-lower owned because he's priced around. He's priced around Jandiroba, who could get a submission, more popular name, and some other guys where Herbert Burns, Dvalishvili. So he's probably going to be lower owned, but if he is going to land those takedowns like he did in that one fight and win the decision, he's going to probably break the slate. He's probably going to be like a Dvalishvili and score north of 100 points. But then you have Chavez, who can land that one punch at any point and put out Brown, and also at 7,400 be on the optimal lineup. That's so this is another fight I think you want to target in general, and I slightly prefer Brown to win the fight, but I do see having Chavez, but I think Brown's going to do just enough to squeak out a decision victory, keep his head from getting subbed, or keep his chin down and not get knocked out. But I'm not super confident, but I think from a DraftKings perspective, he has the chance to really break open the slate.
So I do lean Chavez in this fight. I think that his power is going to be enough that he's going to be able to clip Brown eventually. If this fight stays on the feet, then Brown is in trouble. He's been knocked out 3 times. I think this would easily be a 4th time. It's a little hard to say for certain if the Brown we saw in the last fight is the Brown that we're going to get every fight. Is he going to be a Dvalishvili where the guy is getting 5+ takedowns every single fight, or was that just it was the first fight in his UFC career, and who knows, maybe it was just an abnormality and it doesn't happen again. So I do think that he will get some takedowns, but I don't necessarily think that he will get near as many as he did his last fight. I think that Chavez does have good enough takedown defense to be able to negate some of those takedowns and eventually finish him by striking.
Yeah, Chavez is making his UFC debut, so it's going to be interesting. A lot of debutantes, often struggle when they come in, especially unless they're a high prospect. So I think Brown will squeak it out, but either way, you can't be overconfident on either of these fighters. We can't trust Brown, and you don't know what you're really going to get from Chavez.
Yeah.
But this is definitely, like I said, you probably want to target in GPP.
Yeah.
All right.
Not really cash, I don't think.
No, you don't want this in cash. You can't really trust either of these fighters enough.
Unless you really trust Brown to be able to get these takedowns, then don't touch this fight in cash.
All right. Next, we got Felice Herrig at 7,200 versus Jandiroba at 9,000. What do you think, Ryan?
I think that Jandiroba is the biggest mispriced fighter of this slate. She lands 1.13 strikes per minute. 1.13. In her last 2 fights combined, she had 24 significant strikes total. Unless she gets the finish, she is not scoring enough points in order to be able to cover her price. Herrig does have a 76% takedown defense. Now, granted, she is getting up there in age, like you said on my podcast. She is coming back from injury. So, there is questions of will she be able to stop the takedown as well as she did before, getting hurt and stuff like that. I do think that she will be able to stop it enough, though. I think that this fight will more so be like the Esparza fight that Jandiroba had, where she lands maybe 2-3 takedowns, but at the end of the day, throwing that little strikes, that's not going to be enough to win you a fight. So I do like Herrig a lot for cash, just because, all she really has to do is maybe throw 50-60 strikes and win in a decision, and she's going to get you enough points to make her salary worthwhile in cash. She scores 55-60 points, that's worthwhile in cash for her salary. So I do like her a lot in cash. For Verna, she's GPP at most, and that's only if you are playing multiple lineups. I'd maybe sprinkle her in a couple in the off chance that she is able to get that finish. She does have 15 submission victories in her career, but outside of playing multiple lineups, I wouldn't touch her at all.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much I kind of agree with you for the most part. Jandiroba for 9,000 is just way too high, on DraftKings. I know DraftKings pricing is all based on Vegas odds, and so that's why that price, she was minus 300 when when this came out, and so that's why she's up there. But the only way, for GPP, she's going to pay off value if she can get a submission. And Herrig has only been submitted one time. That was 6 years ago against Ronda Marcos I believe that was during Tough. And
yeah, it was the Ultimate Fighter, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if, Jandiroba is very highly credentialed black belt in jiu-jitsu. So, she might be able to get that submission, but I just don't know if she's going to get it. Felice is very tough. But the biggest concern, she's coming off a 2-year layoff after, tearing her ACL and then having complications afterwards with it. And then she's almost 36 years old. That's, for any MMA fighter besides heavyweight, that's pretty old in, MMA years. And she's been around for a while. She does a lot of fitness modeling and bodybuilding and stuff. So, she's got some wear and tear on her body in general. And her last fight against Michelle Waterson, she looked too stiff. She was getting taken down by, head and arm throws. And that's how Jandiroba gets a lot of her takedowns, is by those head and arm throws. And I think that's what's ultimately going to land Jandiroba to get the decision victory. I think she's going to win probably 2 or 3 rounds. But either way, I just for $9,000, it's just too much. And then Felice is a cash play, but I'm kind of a little bit on the opposite. I don't think you need to throw her in a cash lineup if you don't need to. Like, she probably get a payoff or probably score enough, probably, high 30s, maybe 40 points in a loss. But I don't know. I'm not a big, huge cash player in general. I'm more of a GPP player. So, but I don't know if, I would play her a ton in cash. I think there's other options you could probably go with for cash that are a little bit safer with more upside. There's not much upside with Herring at all.
Yeah.
But next fight we got Vince Pichel at 7,900 versus Jim Miller. Man, like we talked about before, Vince Pichel is one of my favorite fighters. He was on Tough back in, I think it was Tough 15 maybe. But I've always had, I always thought he was a very good fighter. His biggest issues has always been layoffs between fights and injuries. And he's taking on a guy in Jim Miller who's a submission specialist. Jim does hit hard and he can get some knockouts, but most of his wins are, via submission. Jim's biggest issues are his cardio. He goes balls to the wall round 1 looking to take you down and submit you. And then if he can't get that, generally rounds 2 and 3, he's gassed and he either loses a decision victory or he gets knocked out. And right now, Pichel is the favorite for the betting odds. I think last time I checked, he was minus 130 favorite. Let me see right now. He's minus 120, and Jim Miller's the underdog. So there's going to be a lot of odds value right now for Pichel at being the underdog on DraftKings at 7,900. I think for GPP, I think obviously Miller's going to have the higher upside because if he wins, he's probably going to win the first round via submission. So if he's going to he's got the higher upside, where Pichel, if he wins, it's probably going to be more of a decision victory, or he could get a late knockout. But Pichel is not very high volume. I believe he throws like 3 significant strikes a minute. But if you look at Vince Pichel's scoring, most of he scores well and wins, but most of them come via takedown. He scored 8 takedown in a couple fights, 5 and 6, but he's not going to want to take Jim Miller down. That's where Jim Miller does his best. So I think Vince is going to do enough to keep the fight standing for 3 rounds and just, pick Jim apart and potentially land a knockout. But and for GPP, I would say you can target both fighters, but Jim Miller is going to be the higher upside for GPPs, where Vince, I would say you probably going to be higher owned just because of the odds value and the lower price. What do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, I do tend to agree with you that I do think both of these fighters are good picks for GPP. Especially if you're doing multiple lineups, you'll want to sprinkle these guys into those lineups for sure. I lean slightly Miller just due to the fact that Pichel, he has a 22% takedown defense. That is just horrible. Now, granted, Miller's is not much better. Miller's is under 50% as well. But still, 22% takedown defense. I think that Miller's going to be able to land some takedowns off of Pichel's striking. And, when that happens, you're in Miller's world at that point in time, and that's not where you want to be at all. If he can somehow keep the fight on the feet, I think that he could finish Miller by knockout, but just like Miller's last fight against Roosevelt Roberts, Roberts was the much better fighter in that fight. But if you take Miller to the ground, he is gonna make you pay. So I do think eventually Miller will get the fight to the ground and will submit him.
Right. Next fight, we got John Dodson at 7,500, and you got Merab Dvalishvili at 8,700. Ryan, gonna kick this one to you.
Yeah. So, spoiler alert: Marab is the play of the week, the must-have. He is our must-have of this week with DFI. Plain and simple, this guy, just like his nickname says, he is an absolute machine. Um, you know, he's been the must-have in many of our slates that we've covered, and for good reason. If you followed any of our must-haves, you know that this guy, he just goes for takedown after takedown after takedown. In his last 6 fights, he's had a combined 52 takedowns total, and there's been 3 fights where he's had double digits. Just in his last fight, he scored 175 points in a 3-round fight. 175 points. He averaged almost 60 points a round in a 3-round fight. This is a guy that you want absolutely in cash and GPP lineups at his price point. The only worry that you have to have with him is that he has shown from time to time when he's trying to get the takedown that he does not really pay attention to striking defense. And that can lead him to get rocked from time to time, but normally he's strong enough that he can still get the takedown even when he is rocked. Dodson has not finished anyone in many years, so I don't necessarily think that Dodson will be able to finish Dvalishvili, and he is a lot smaller than Dvalishvili as well. So I do think that he will absolutely be able to get at least at minimum 5 takedowns this fight, and that's at the very minimum. And that he is someone that you want to lock into all lineups.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, Merab's lowest point scored in his UFC career is 71, and that was in a loss. I mean, the guy is just an absolute point scoring machine for DraftKings. He's able to take guys down. He's a former judo guy, and in judo, you want to get points by taking guys down, and that's why he lets guys down and then he lets them back up. He could probably keep the fight on the ground if he really wanted to, but he's just so used to judo where you just get guys down, get them back up, and that's why he's doing that. And if you watch his reactions after the press conferences when he beat his takedown record on his last fight, he's like, yes, like that's what I want to do, and like that's what he's looking to do. He's looking to set records with takedowns. I don't know if he's gonna get it necessarily like he's gotten the last two, because Dodson's got good takedown defense, but ever since Dodson's moved up to bantamweight, he's been taken down enough times by fighters, and he's going to be the smaller fighter in this fight. And for the Merab, you want to lock him in for cash GPP. He's probably going to be very highly owned though. At 8,700, he's priced pretty cheaply for what he can score. So he's probably going to be one of the higher owned fighters on the slate. But then you got John Dodson on the other hand, who's very low volume fighter, and the only path I could see for him winning is a first round knockout. I don't think if it goes to decision, there's no way he's going to win unless he really improved his takedown defense a ton and his cardio a ton, because Dodson ends up fading as the fight goes along. And Dodson is only someone you want to sprinkle in if you're doing mass entering GPPs, or you want to be super, super contrarian and you go against the grain where everybody's going to be on Merab and you just hope Dodson lands that one knockout punch and you have a huge advantage on the field by having Dodson in your lineup. But I don't think you want to go that route. I don't think even when Dodson does win, by decision, it's very, very low scoring. And I just think Merab's pace and everything is just way too much in this fight. Dodson might stuff the first 2, 3, maybe 4 takedowns, but eventually Merab's going to get the takedown, and then once he does, he's going to keep doing it for 3 rounds, and probably going to get, low end would probably be 4 or 5 takedowns. High end, I could see him getting probably as high as 9. I don't think he's going to go 12, 13 like his last 2, but I think he's going to be right up there. At the end of the day, in the decision victory, scoring north of 100 points.
Absolutely.
The next fight, we got Herbert Burns versus Daniel Pineda. Me and Ryan talked a lot about this. Herbert Burns was borderline going to be the next, or was going to be the must-have. The main reason we kind of didn't go with it is slightly due to pricing. You can get Merab for $200 cheaper, and he has Merab just has a higher ceiling and a higher floor. Where Herbert Burns more than likely in this fight is going to get a first-round submission. Could get a knockout, but more than likely I see it's going to come via submission because that's how Pineda has lost majority of his losses is via submission. I think Burns' jiu-jitsu is way better than Pineda. Pineda's a black belt, but there's levels to black belts, and Burns is way higher. I mean, Burns is the brother of Gilbert Burns, who's a top welterweight and training at a great camp. And I don't know how Pineda will win this besides if his cardio ends up being better than Burns, because Burns does have some cardio issues. But anytime Pineda's gotten out of the first or early second, he loses decisions or loses the fight. So I like Burns a lot. He's another fighter who's more than likely going to be highly owned for DraftKings, but I think you can fit Merab and Burns in your lineups and still have plenty of room to build. I think probably that's how you're going to want to build a lot of your rosters, especially if you're only building, a handful of lineups. You're going to probably want to do a lot of Burns and Dvalishvili as your 1-2 and then go from there. What do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, we went back and forth on who the must have should be between Burns and Dvalishvili. And we did go with Dvalishvili. We agreed that Burns is basically a 1B, and that if we did do a second must have, it would be Burns. I think that he absolutely is going to win this fight via submission. Pineda has 6 losses via submission. Granted, none of them have been in a very long time, but still going against a guy of Burns' caliber who averages 4.59 takedowns per fight. Eventually, the fight is going to get down to the ground, and I think he's going to finish him. Pineda is another one of those fighters that is coming from PFL. Not to continue to knock on PFL, but they've just shown time and time again that the fighters that they bring over to the UFC after PFL just are not on the same level as UFC fighters. And now he's fighting a guy in Burns who is a great up-and-coming prospect, the brother of the #1 contender who was just supposed to fight for the title a couple pay-per-views ago, and has been announced that he will fight for the title next against Usman, I believe. So, he has the bloodline, and I think that this is easily his fight to lose. Cash, GPP, I think he put him in there, and that's one of the reasons that I did mention putting Herrig into a cash lineup, is because it can then allow you to, get Dvalishvili, get Burns, get someone in the main event if you want. It can add so many layers to your lineup that I think you will see a lot of people doing that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing with Herbert Burns too, is like if you watch him, he's improving every single fight. And that's the one thing I think, like a lot of people at the beginning were like, oh, his cardio, oh, he's going to get knocked out. And then what does he do? This first fight, he knocks him out with a high knee. The next fight, he gets a submission. Like, he's improving every fight and looking better. And obviously his cardio is probably going to keep improving because Gilbert Burns has got great cardio. Look what he did to Woodley.
Yeah.
I think he's going to really show in this fight, especially now that he got moved up to the main card. Because I believe before, the fights dropped off and everything, he was on the prelims. So now that he's on the main card, he's going to show a lot of people what he's got. And it's, the Burns brothers are very tough to deal with. Like, I forget who I heard say it, but imagine seeing the Burns brothers versus the Diaz brothers in a fight. Who would you pick in that? That's very interesting.
I think I would go the Burns brothers, honestly, but it's partially due to the fact that I don't like the Diaz brothers. I think they're punks. So
Yeah,
I
but
always want to see them get knocked out, but
they're all in the roughly the same weight class too, so it would be very interesting. Like if it was prime Diaz's versus prime Burns, it would be very interesting scrap, and that would be kind of fun to see. But obviously, we're not going to see that because the Diaz aren't really fighting anymore, and the Burnses are just right now they're just better than the Diaz's. But that would be definitely an interesting, fun scrap to see if it ever happens. All right, next fight we got Jairzinho Rozenstruik versus Junior Dos Santos. We got Rozenstruik at 8,400 and Dos Santos at 7,800. What do you think on this one, Ryan?
So this was the third fight that I was semi considering. We ended up, definitely not going with it just because it's a little bit more risky, but that I was considering it as potential a must have. Rozenstruik, I think is just, he's going to finish Dos Santos. Dos Santos has lost 5 fights via knockout. His chin just is not what it used to be. And I think that Rozenstruik can honestly probably beat anyone in that division outside of maybe Stipe and Francis, who knocked him out cold. There is, I guess, questions of how he will come back from that. Anytime that you get knocked out that badly, how does it affect you those next couple fights? We've seen some fighters get knocked out like that and just not be able to come back for a couple fights. So I guess there is that a little bit of concern. But I think that he'll be able to finish Dos Santos. The only chance that Dos Santos has at all is if somehow he is able to kind of pick and pop, or if he goes against everything that he's ever done in his entire career. Like you said, he's had maybe 3 takedowns in his UFC career or something like that. So if he goes against that and actually tries to take down Rozenstruik, that is, the one weakness that he does have is that his takedown defense is not very good at all. So if Dos Santos was smart, that's what he would do. But I don't think that's what he's going to do. That's just, for whatever reason, he doesn't go that route in his fights, and I think it's going to lead to him getting finished.
I mean, this is another fight for GPPs you want to target. I mean, obviously we both favor Rozenstruik. I think Rozenstruik is a former kickboxer. I think he has roughly 70, 80 kickboxing fights under his belt. Not that he was a highly credentialed kickboxer, but it still fights, and it gets you time in there. Where Junior Dos Santos, over his last 12 fights, is 6-6. Previous to that, that's when he was holding a title, and he was looking great. That was also pre-USADA. So, and who knows what USADA's, what if he was on any juices at the time, and now he's not, and that's why he's looked terrible. Just suspicion. But also, if you look at Junior Dos Santos right now, he looks ripped. He's got, he's jacked. He's got a 6-pack. He's everything. But USADA, I'm not sure if, I didn't look to see if, Dos Santos was training down in Brazil or if he's up in the States. Because if he's down in Brazil, they're not doing USADA testing anywhere outside the United States. So he could be back on the juice. I doubt it. But Dos Santos is a high-volume striker. He's got very good technical striking. He throws at nearly, I think it's almost 5 significant strike. I think it's like 4.66 or high 4s. And but the problem is Rozenstruik is a counter striker. When you watched him versus Overeem, he was, Overeem was taking him down, so that's where a lot of the fight, good amount of the fight took place. So he wasn't able to counter strike. But when he finally got his chance to counter strike, that's when he put, Overeem on his butt and knocked him out. I think because of the way Dos Santos comes and is aggressive with his striking, it's going to give Rozenstruik plenty of opportunities to land that knockout. And the only thing that concerns me a little bit as Rozenstruik is that he's coming off a knockout to Ngannou, and it's only been roughly 3 months since that knockout. So who knows how his brain has recovered and everything since then. But when you get knocked out pretty good, you usually want to take 6 months, 8 months, a year off to recover. But I think even with that, I think Rozenstruik is gonna land that punch and knock out Dos Santos. If Curtis Blades can knock him out, who's not a power puncher. I mean, he does have power. Any heavyweight does, but he's not known for his striking and known for his power. He's a wrestler. So if he can able to knock out Dos Santos, Rozenstruik should be able to do it. And I think for 8,400, that cheap for GPP, you want to lock him in. He's gonna score well. And and if JDS wins, it's probably going to be by a knockout, and he's going to be on the up. So this is another fight. It's minus 300 to, doesn't go to decision. You're going to want to lock one of these guys in, but we both prefer Rozenstruik, and we think he's a great GPP play. Next fight of the night, we got Marlon Vera 7,000, and we got Sean O'Malley at 9,200. Honestly, Sean O'Malley, I personally think, you can fade him altogether. Cash, GPP. You can definitely play him in cash. He's definitely more of a cash play in my opinion. When you look at Vera, he's a very, very durable fighter. He's never been finished, and I think Sugar Sean is, basically a first round knockout, or I don't see him getting the finish in the second or third. With just how the competition Vera's faced, he's faced guys like Lineker. He's faced, some high, very heavy hitters, and withstood all that. I just don't know. I just don't see O'Malley knocking him out. And at 9,200, he needs that finish, or his volume is not going to be enough to get him to, that 10x at 92 points. He does throw nearly 7, I think it's like 692 significant strikes or somewhere around there for Sean. But even at that, it's just not enough to score well. I think it's well enough for cash, but for GPP, I think you can fade him easily. He's going to be highly owned, and I just think don't even put him in there for GPP. You can exclude him from your player pool. He's going to be so highly owned. You'll have a huge advantage by not having him in. Where Vera, on the other hand, he starts off fight slow and comes on strong, and that's where it's kind of the opposite of O'Malley, where he starts strong and goes weak. So, if Vera is to win, he's going to win because he's going to take over rounds 2 and 3, and he could potentially sub O'Malley. That's where O'Malley's weak, is on the ground. He's shown that before when he's gotten taken down. He struggles. But I ultimately think O'Malley gets a decision victory. Vera is more of a multi-ante GPP play. He's still going to garner some good ownership, just because a lot of people think O'Malley is too hyped for his name, and this is a big step up in competition. But I ultimately think Sean O'Malley is going to get a decision with victory, probably score 85 to maybe 90 points, where it's fine for cash, but GPP, you don't want that in GPP this week. I think there's going to be enough finishes or people who can wrestle that can make up that points to be 100 plus. I think it's going to be a very high scoring week in general. What do you think, Ryan? I know you're the opposite of me.
Yeah, so I do think eventually he probably does finish Vera. I think that his knockout power is good enough that he can finish Vera. I do hope that you're right, because I would not at all be surprised if O'Malley, just due to his name, he's very popular with the MMA crowd right now, especially the fans that are not really fans, I'd say, but they watch from time to time. He's a very well-known fighter. I would not at all be shocked if he is the highest owned fighter on this slate, due to that.
I don't think he's going to be the highest owned. I think he's going to be top 5, because you're going to have probably the main event garter 2 of the top 5. Then you have Merab and Burns. So he's going to fall somewhere probably in that range. But then you also have, Rozenstruik too, who's going to garner some ownership. So he's going to be that top, 5, 6 ownership. I think he's going to be as high as maybe 4, maybe 3 ownership.
I would be very, very surprised if he is less than top 3.
Yeah, I guess we'll find out. I mean, I honestly think he's going to be no higher than 3. But I think he's going to be more of that 4 to 6 range in ownership, because that I think there are a lot of people are going to go Cormier, Dvalishvili, Burns, Stipe, and then it's going to be O'Malley and Rozenstruik somewhere within that bottom 3 of ownership.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody puts out content, and it's going to sway people certain ways, one way or another, depending upon. I think the main event is what's going to draw people one way or another, depending upon what Roto Grinder says, what we say, what DFS Army says. It's going to push people. So who knows where it could eventually go? But those guys are all going to be in that top 6 range. They're going to garner a ton of ownership, probably 35+% ownership. And I would say most of them are probably going to be closer to in the 40s range, I would say, with ownership.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that O'Malley, like I said, I do think that he does finish him. But I do get what you're saying, that, for cash, he may be the better play. Honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, though, I may actually think that Vera is a better cash play. It's one of those fights where he does throw a good amount of strikes. So if he can last, if you do go a cheap fighter, Vera, Herrig, now that I'm thinking about it, Vera may be a little bit better of a play for cash than Herrig would.
Yeah, I don't mind, Vera as a cash punt play, because I do expect this to go to decision. I mean, I'm looking at some of Vera's losses right now on DraftKings, via decision. In Lineker, he scored 25 points, but then he got, when he fought the Silva Andres, he scored 37. He went to with the Song Yadong in his last fight, he scored 59 in a decision, but he poured it on in the second and third rounds, and he also got 2 takedowns in an advance in that fight, where he potentially could get some takedowns in this fight. I don't see it. He's not a huge takedown guy. I mean, he almost averages 1 a fight, and that's where O'Malley struggles, is when he gets taken down. So maybe Vera's going to go that route in this fight and see what he can do. But I don't hate Vera as a punt play. He throws nearly 4 strikes a minute. So if he can get that and maybe land a takedown, you're looking at that forward, high 30s, 40s, maybe gets up into the 50 range again. Especially since O'Malley's going to bring the pace. If he can keep it, it's going to make Vera have to throw more. So maybe he comes like another Song Yadong fight where he scores 50, 60.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it all depends. Looking at like my cash lineup that I have right now, I kind of have to decide. Do I go Vera and Rozenstruik, or do I go Vera Miocic, or do I go Herrig Miocic? It's kind of one of those things. Like, do you want to stack the main event, which we can talk about the next fight? So you have some lineups to play around with. So it's I think Vera is more a cash than necessarily GPP, unless you're multi-entering.
Yeah, I agree. All right, now we're at the main event. We got Daniel Cormier, 8,000, Stipe Miocic at 8,200. What do you think, Ryan?
So I think that this is DC's fight to lose. I think that he played more so with his heart than his head the last fight. And he wanted to go out proving that the first knockout against Stipe was not a fluke, and that he could knock out someone like that before he retired. And no knock against DC, but throwing as many significant strikes as he did in the first 3 rounds, over 170, that is not his route to victory. DC is a grind him out, get in your face, annoy the hell out of you, take you down, wrestle you, ground and pound. That's the type of fighter that DC is. And I think that's what he has to go back to this fight, because throwing the amount of strikes that he did, it gassed him out way, way too much. Not to say that wrestling doesn't gas you out, because obviously it does, but that's the type of gas that he's used to, because that's what he's gone with in most of his fights. So I think that he will go back to his wrestling-based roots in this fight, and that he will be able to win either late finish or via decision. If he does try to throw like the last fight, it's just a matter of time, I think, before Miocic finishes him. Just because, a guy of DC's size, the way that he's built, he's going to get tired throwing that many strikes. Compared to Miocic, who, he's a heavyweight, but the way that he's built a lot differently than DC is, and carries that weight a lot differently. So I like DC, especially for DraftKings. I think you can put him in cash. I think you can put him in GPP. At the price point that they gave these guys, both of them, it's going to be a toss-up. I think you'll see both of them at minimum 35% in the GPPs. My guess is one of them will be at about 35%. One will be probably about 45 to 50%. So I think, the way that they price these guys, that's what you'll see. It is a stackable fight, I think. Because I do think that it'll at least get at the very minimum to the 3rd round, even if DC does throw a lot of strikes. So it is a stackable fight, especially at the price point. But as we've always said, do not stack for GPP. It'll work once, twice, maybe 3 times a year if you're lucky.
Well, the funniest thing is, last time these two fought, they were both on the GPP winning lineup that night.
Yeah. So guess what? Guess what? Lightning ain't striking twice.
I know. I mean, I completely agree with you. You never want to stack with GPP, but it's just funny that this fight actually was one of those fights that if you stacked it, Miocic scored 117 and Cormier scored like 102 or something like that.
Yeah, I think we're gonna see a lot different fight than we did last time. I think they will still throw, but you're not going to see 175 significant strikes for the first 3 rounds for DC. You'll maybe see that the entire fight if it goes to decision.
I mean, this is, it's a tough fight. Cormier's been talking about retirement. Miocic, on the other hand, is also, hinted at retirement as well. But he's also said in the press conference recently that he thinks about retiring after every single fight. So it'll be interesting on that end to see what their mental state is. I'm assuming they're both coming super focused. They both want to, go out on top if they are going out, especially DC, because DC's basically said this is it. If he loses, he's done. If he wins, he's done. The belt's going to be, either won by Miocic or be vacated by Cormier, and Miocic's going to be fighting again for the title. The one thing that worries about me is Cormier does seem to fatigue as the fight goes along. You saw it in his last fight against, Stipe, but that was because Cormier threw 180 significant strikes. That's out of the norm for him. But at the same time, too, he keeps talking about he wants to go back to his roots in wrestling. Wrestling takes just as much out of you, and Stipe's a big guy. He's 6 foot tall. He's, going to have an 80-inch reach. And Stipe's a former Division I wrestler. He defends takedowns at 73%, which is kind of interesting because DC said he's tough to take down. So I don't know how many takedowns DC is going to get. DC is a Olympic level wrestler, but DC or Miocic can defend him. And Miocic was actually able to take DC down in the last fight. I don't see Miocic trying to do that again. I think that's just silly because Cormier will be able to probably scramble back up and possibly get him down. But I think Cormier is going to probably be. It's probably going to be a similar fight where it's going to be Cormier wins rounds 1, 2, and 3 again, whether it's via striking or wrestling, and then he's going to have to hold on rounds 4 and 5 and weather the storm from Miocic. Miocic has pretty good cardio. There's been fights in the past where his cardio has faded later, but for the most part, he's pretty good cardio. Both fighters, if I'm looking at their significant strike, they both throw north of 4, which is pretty high for a heavyweight fight. I prefer Daniel Cormier because of the wrestling, and I think he could knock out Stipe again. There was, in this first fight, DC said he saw a hole in Miocic's game in the clinch where the way he moves out of the clinch, and that's how DC knocked him out in that first round. He was practicing it. So I'm assuming in that second fight, Stipe practiced defending that and did it differently. So Cormier wasn't able to land that knockout blow coming out of the clinch. So I wonder if Stipe's still preparing for that and has practiced against that, or Cormier might see that again and try it again. Could be interesting to see if he's able to watch how his head comes out of the clinch and knock him out. But I think Cormier wins this fight. It could be either via finish, between rounds 1 and 3, or it could be, like I said, a decision where he holds on. The preferred play for us, is both Cormier at 8,000. I think he's going to be the highest owned fighter on the slate. I think he's going to garner, 40 to probably north of 50% ownership. And Stipe is, going to be very highly owned as well. He's probably going to be high 30s, maybe low 40s to, somewhere in the mid 40 ownership. Both fighters you're going to want to target for GPP. I think you want, if you're doing 20, 50 lineups, you're probably going to want them in almost every single lineup. Probably go 60%, Cormier, 40%, Miocic. Could go a little bit higher one way or another. But I think this is a fight you're pretty much going to want in almost every single lineup, whether it finishes or it goes to decision. I think it's going to score very highly. And like you said, for cash, I think this is pretty much you got to stack it for cash. If you looked in the last fight, it went 4 rounds. They scored 220 points, I think, between the two of them. And, if it does it again, even if they don't get, even if there isn't a finish, it goes to decision, it's probably going to be the same thing. It's probably going to score, the loser probably scores maybe 80 to 90, and the winner's going to score 100 plus.
Even the first fight with a first round finish, I still think between the two of them, they scored close to 140 points between the two of them, and that was the first round finish.
Yeah, well, I think obviously most of that was because of DC getting, I think it was 130 points between the two, which for a stack is not terrible. I mean, you would, you're looking for like, a combined like 70-ish points, 65, 70 between the two, when you're stacking. But I honestly think, it's a great fight to stack for cash. I mean, if it does finish in the first round, whether it's Stipe or Cormier, you're probably going to get 120 points, which is fine. It's not going to hurt you.
They're going to be so high owned that it's not going to hurt you.
Especially them being 8,000, 8,200. If it was like 9,600 or like 9,000 and a low 7, and the 7,000 fighter got the knockout, then it would screw you, because then that 9,000 price fighter is now getting 0, where you could have got someone else in that range. So this is a fight that it's the exact middle range. You got to stack it and not think twice about it in cash. And in GPP, you're going to want this fight in your lineup. I don't think it's worth fading for GPP at all. I mean, I guess you could if you really want to, but I just think this is a fight they're going to pay off their value. They're probably going to score north of 90 points in a win, probably in the hundreds, more than likely. So that wraps up the Toehold MMA podcast. Be sure to look out, for all our content. We're going to probably put some bets. So if you're not a subscriber to the DFI bets, check that out. We'll have some bets up there, and we'll see you next week.
Yep.
All right. Bye, guys.